Alright guys, and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be discussing what alt should you make in TBC Classic. I want this video to be more of a quick fire of all the little pros and cons of every single class, focusing more on the quality of life and overall fun and experience of playing each class, rather than stressing the nitty-gritty viability in PvE and particular raid tiers and everything like that, because I think people make alts with much more of a casual mindset, like having a little bit of fun when you're not playing your main, or for more practical reasons like farming gold. And by the way guys, if you're looking for an extremely fast leveling guide made by the best power levelers in the world, then you may want to check out Rested XP. I'll leave a link to that in the description below if you want to check it out. If you do consider getting the guide, you'll be massively helping out and supporting the channel, which is very much appreciated in these very difficult times for World of Warcraft content creators. But anyway, let's jump into talking about the Druid. I'm going to go in alphabetical order, like I always do, so I show absolutely no class bias. So first of all, you got your Druid, extremely fast to level. They're very versatile for your raid and very viable because pretty much every single spec is very good and has a place within a raid. You can also take advantage of Swift Flight Form, which is very fast for node farming, mining and herbalism. And that's because you don't have to bother mounting and demounting every time that you want to, mine some ore. And because of their great sustainability and survivability, they're also great for any other farming that you're considering doing, like primal farming or stuff like that. They also have stealth, which gives them access to certain stealth farms, and stealth is always very, very useful, let's be honest. You also have the most irritating crowd control ability in the game, which is very useful in Arena, and you have very quick rest time. Right, you don't have to spend barely any time getting back to your corpse, when you do, die in a dungeon or a raid or something, because you can just pop into cat form and press dash. Now let's talk about the cons. So unfortunately you have no normal resurrection ability as a druid, so that's kind of a problem if you do wipe and you are the only, person who can resurrect, because you'll have to use your combat res, which is, a bigger cooldown, best used actually in combat. The feral spec can be difficult to perform the rotation, because it's quite difficult to master, although some people can see that obviously as a positive because some people like the challenge. If I'm going to be perfectly honest, Resto is the only real top tier arena spec. Feral is basically like a worse version of a rogue. People just normally prefer to bring a rogue instead because it just goes better in particular comps. Feral tank is not the best in the world for AoE next to a protection paladin, so protection paladins are always going to be better at dungeons and clearing dungeons faster. It's going to be a little bit irritating when those kind of stupid mages and warlocks start AoEing when there's a feral druid, because you're going to be running around the spot, popping your taunt and trying to get aggro off the mages and warlocks. It can be quite frustrating. And another downside, you're always in a form, so you don't really get to see your gear that much. Now let's move on to the Hunter. Extremely fast at leveling, probably the fastest power leveling class out there next to a Warlock. They're probably quite close, to be honest. They're also the best DPS in the game, again very close to a Warlock. Very good at farming gold, pretty much like any gold farming method. A Hunter is really good at it because they can just pump and pump without having to stop. A Hunter only needs 4 pieces of Beast Lord gear, and then your DPS just skyrockets. So they have a very low gear requirement because you can just farm dungeon gear to basically have gear that's going to last you into a Black Temple. Although that can also be seen as a disadvantage because it means you have to farm that Beast Lord gear. Like, I've heard some horror stories, like there's a guy in my guild I think did it over 100 times and didn't get his Beast Lord chest. But overall, I think a Hunter, when you do get a little bit lucky, they can catch up on gear very quickly and get into raids very quick. Now a disadvantage obviously is a lot of people play Hunter, which means you've got high gear competition. Some people also find a rotation a little bit simple and boring. A few people in my guild quit playing a Hunter within the first month of TBC Classic because they just simply got bored of playing it. But some people may not find it boring. It really is depending on the individual. And they're also not the most viable class in Arena, more of a mid-tier class. They can go well in a double healer comp, but again, there's just better and stronger classes and comps out there for Arena. Now let's talk about the Mage. You have access to ludicrously insane gold farming methods, like the Slave Pens farm and many other farming methods, which also makes him an extremely fast leveler because you can take advantage of AoE farming while leveling too. And are also very viable for raiding. There's also some great quality of life aspects to the class, like you have portals, which means you can teleport around the world and get around much faster than any other class. You also have totally free food and water, you never have to spend gold on that. Also, they're great for rep farming because of their insane AoE damage. They're a top tier PvP class, they fit into many different comps, and overall, yeah, one of the top 3 PvP classes for Arena. You barely have any mana issues because you can have the mana gem, you have evocations, you've got 2 really strong mana cooldowns on top of your mana potions, although when you do play Arcane Mage, it's definitely a different story. And you also have this really strong crowd control, obviously with Polymorph. Now the disadvantage is you will become weaker as the expansion progresses, especially when you compare yourself to a Warlock and a Hunter. So yeah, their DPS kind of drops off later in the expansion. And it can be very frustrating to play an Arcane Mage because it burns so much mana. And they also have a very high skill ceiling in PvP. You can't just jump into PvP and expect to get really high ratings straight away. It's going to require a lot of time and practice. Let's move on to the Paladin now. Like the Mage, they are insane for gold farming. You can do Stratholmes, Slave Pens, and there's a BM farm as well. You will always find a group pretty much instantaneously as a Protection Paladin, because there's a massive shortage of Protection Paladins and tanks overall on TBC right now, so rep grinding and gearing up is going to be extremely quick. Plus your AoE damage and threat is just great, so it allows, you know, mages and warlocks and any other class really to just pump their AoE damage a lot, so you always clear a dungeon practically twice as fast with a good Protection Paladin. When you play Retribution, you have probably no competition when it comes to getting two-handed weapons because nobody else really uses them except like warriors, but they mostly play Fury. And yeah, overall they just have very low gear competition because your only gear competition is mainly going to be like melee DPS, and there just isn't a lot of melee DPS in TBC Classic. However, that may change later on in the expansion. With Crusader Aura, your mount is a little bit faster, so pretty Bob's your uncle. You have extremely overpowered survival abilities like Lay on Hands, Divine Shield, and Blessing of Protection. Probably never going to have threat issues either as a Retribution Paladin because you can buff yourself with Blessing of Salvation. And if you ever do pull aggro, you can just quickly pop Divine Shield anyway, and then the threat will drop. Well, technically the threat drop is only temporary, so be careful of that. And then Holy Paladin, overall very low mana issues when it comes to healing. Retribution is also very high demand. I think, to be honest, all the Paladin specs are very high demand right now because not many people play Paladin, but particularly Rep Paladin. And you also have much cheaper mounts when you get to level 30 and level 60. When it comes to Arena, none of the specs really stand out that much. None of them are, you know, top dog, top tier spec. They're also not the fastest levelers in the world. A lot of people also believe they are probably one of the most boring classes to level. You know, people make jokes that, you know, you use your seal and judgment, tab out and watch Netflix for a little bit, and it is, yeah, pretty much true. And it's also kind of irritating playing a Paladin because people are always shouting at you to buff them, and you always have to remember to buff them. And when you haven't played a buff class like ever and switched to playing a Paladin, it takes a while to just kind of like, you know, remember to buff people. Now let's move on to the Priest. As many people know, I do play a Shadow Priest as my main, and in my humble opinion, it is the most fun class to play, mainly because it has the most interesting rotation to play. It's also extremely easy to find a raid group as a Shadow Priest because they're in such high demand, but not many people play them. And both specs are just top dog for PvP and PvE. Well, in PvP, most priests are going to play Discipline rather than Holy. And then obviously Shadow Priests are also great as well, especially in the Shadow Play composition. It's also very hard to run out of mana because of Vampiric Touch and Shadow Fiend. It's very fast to level, has great sustainability and survivability, so leveling is very fast. Another thing I like about playing Shadow Priest is, particularly in Phase 1, you don't need to farm like loot drops really, because a lot of your best in slot gear either comes from crafted gear or stuff you can quickly buy at the auction house. The downside to that obviously is you have to spend a lot of gold, but I personally prefer that over waiting for good RNG and winning loot over other people and, you know, getting involved in other various loot drama shenanigans. Now let's talk about the downsides. When you're playing a Shadow Priest, it is very risky to use Shadow Word Death. It can be very frustrating because to optimize your rotation you have to put yourself in harm's way because it does deal damage to yourself. So yeah, sometimes when you're learning Shadow Priest, you will accidentally kill yourself, or you simply cannot maximize your DPS because you're, it would just kill you, or it'd just be too risky and you're putting too much pressure on the healers. They also don't scale particularly well, apparently. This is what I've heard from people who play private servers. So when people, when Shadow Priest get to about tier 6, tier 6.5, they normally re-roll because their DPS is so bad. But this is just something I've heard from private servers. Again, a lot of things that people have said from playing private servers that has turned out to be totally wrong, so only time will tell whether Shadow Priest is going to still be good in the later tiers. Unfortunately, playing a healer priest, you do have mana issues. I've heard that, playing a priest, you have the biggest mana issues out of any other healers. Again, that's just word of mouth, it's not my opinion. And then it's also kind of frustrating that you cannot heal while you're in shadow form, so your survivability is not that great even while playing a Shadow Priest. You have to break shadow form to heal yourself. Now let's talk about the rogue. Obviously the rogue is the absolute god of PvP, pretty much like always in World of Warcraft, and you will become much stronger as later tiers come out, like tier 6, especially with glaives when it comes to PvE. Obviously you have stealth, you cannot complain at stealth. If you have never played a stealth class and then go to playing a stealth class, you'll be like, why on earth have I never played a stealth class in my life? Okay, it also gives you access to a really good gold making farm with mining. You have lots of CC, utility and control. You basically got a trick up your sleeve for every single situation as a rogue, which is great. You can very easily drop Threat with Vanish and also Feint, so that's great for saving your life too, and for, not pulling aggro in raids. And rogue, I would argue that rogue are a really fast leveler when you enchant your weapons with fiery weapon, because then, yeah, your damage is just ludicrous and you do kill stuff very fast, so I would argue they're like a mid to top tier leveler. But the problem with playing a rogue, obviously, is there's a lot of stigma that rogues are very bad, so it can be quite hard to get groups, even though, in my opinion, this stigma is totally unwarranted, particularly as we start moving into like tier 6 content when rogues are going to start pumping. And then you're also very gear and consumable dependent. So to top meters, you have to have good RNG on gear drops and spend a lot of money on consumables. I'll give you a little example. So one of the rogues in my guild has been farming Karazhan basically since launch, and he's only just got his best in slot cloak, right? Let's move on to the Shaman. Shaman is probably, again, one of the easiest classes to get a group with because of Bloodlust and all the utility and support that you give to a raid and to a dungeon group. They're also very fast to level, especially if you do the trick I mentioned when I was talking about rogues, and put fiery weapon enchants on both of your weapons. I would say Enhancement is probably one of the most fun and challenging rotations to mess around with, so it will keep you interested. Elemental has good single target and cleave DPS. Resto is insane for AoE healing, so it can be very good on particular raid bosses. And you barely ever have to worry about crowd control as a Shaman because of grounding and Tremor Totem. Every Shaman spec is also great in 5v5 arenas because of your Bloodlust. And you also get a free extra Hearthstone, so you can't complain at that. But it isn't the most viable spec in PvP apart from Restoration. When you're playing Elemental and Enhancement, the problem is you are very, very squishy, so again, it's not a top tier class in Arena. Resto can fit into particular comps. Again, what's really carrying like a Resto Shaman in Arena is your Bloodlust, because Bloodlust is so good. But it is quite difficult to play Resto Shaman because they are kind of squishy, and they have to hardcast a lot of healing abilities, so it can be very, a difficult class to play. I personally think that the elemental rotation in raids is fairly simple, and I get bored of it very quickly. They also don't scale well later on into the Burning Crusade, so I've heard anyway. And overall, you just have very low survivability and maneuverability outside of using Ghost Wolf as a Shaman, and they're not the best gold farming class in the world either. Now let's move on to the Warlock. I would argue that the Warlock is the god hero class of the Burning Crusade. They're, the best class in PvE, PvP, they do the best single target DPS up there of a Hunter, they do the best AoE DPS up there of a Mage, and in Arena, yeah, they're just top tier and fit into a number of different comps. There's also many different specs to play, which are all very viable. If you still think there's only one spec you can play as a Warlock, then I recommend for you to get on the Warlock Discord and get yourself clued up, because there's many different viable specs you can mess around with, and I like that, because I like being able to play different specs rather than, you know, just sticking to the same spec, which is the most viable, you know, for the whole expansion. They're extremely easy to level, probably the fastest and easiest class to level in the game, next to a Hunter, but probably just a little bit faster than a Hunter in my opinion. They can easily own like 3 to 4 mobs all at once, constantly with barely any downtime. You know, I'd recommend checking out my Warlock leveling guide, I'll link that in the description too. And they're also great for gold farming, particularly when it comes to primal farming, because they have such great like survivability. Like they can just dot an elemental up, move on to the next one, move on to the next one, and just take on about like 20 elementals all at once, but like be able to like survive the damage and be able to, you know, efficiently kill all of those elementals. So yeah, they're great for primal farming. You've also got cheaper mounts at level 30 and 60. You can summon people, and not many people know this, but the Infernal is really overpowered when it comes to soloing group quests, and to be honest, overall, Warlock are just insane at soloing group quests. Now the downside is obviously you're going to have high gear competition, because many people do play a Warlock. Soul Shard farming is kind of irritating. Like, it really is a pain in the backside, to be honest, always constantly having to remember to pop your drained soul from time to time to farm some soul shards in a dungeon, and then you just seem to constantly be always using soul shards as well. But anyway, the threat drop spell, also Soul Shatter, is kind of bad. It has a big cooldown and you need a soul shard again, so you just burn through soul shards so quickly. And if you're playing Demolition, I don't know why I always call it Demolition, it's called Demonology, and if your pet dies, your DPS drops like a truck ton, because the pet gives you certain buffs when the pet is active, and obviously when the pet isn't active, then you kind of start hitting like a noodle. So if you're playing Demo, yeah, your pet dying can massively let you down, and the same goes for PvP. If you're playing, you know, any spec, well, you will pretty much all the time be playing with a pet in PvP, and when your pet dies, when people focus it, then your survivability drops, your damage drops and everything like that. So yeah, your pet can really let you down. It can be very frustrating trying to keep your pet alive in an arena. Now lastly, we have the Warrior. If you play a tank, like the Protection Paladin, you're going to get groups easy, and, you know, a Feral Druid for that matter, whenever you play any tank, because there's such a tank shortage at the moment. You have very low gear competition at the moment, because not many people are really playing Warrior. Most people are playing Warlocks and Hunters, you know, so that's great. Never have to worry about mana as well, which is a godsend when you've been playing a caster for too long. You also have a very fun and engaging rotation. Your AoE and cleave DPS are really, really good. And they're also a really top tier class in PvP, mainly because of Mortal Strike, which reduces healing by 50%, and all the other overpowered abilities in their toolkit. Now the downsides is pretty similar to a rogue. You know, there's a lot of stigma that warriors are bad when it comes to being a DPS, so you normally just become a protection tank slave if you want to do raids, which is totally unwarranted, because the highest DPS ever achieved in Phase 1 was actually by a warrior. So yeah, and I think more people will be playing more melee DPS as the expansion goes on, so I think that stigma will diminish over time. And here comes a really loud storm to ruin my recording. Happy days. Like a rogue, they are very gear and consumable dependent, so you need to pray to the RNG gods a lot and spend a lot of gold getting the best consumables, mainly your haste potions. And you're probably going to be second in line to get glaives behind a rogue, or unless you really do stand out as a raid member. And also not the best at gold farming. However, if you do play protection and you have good gear, particularly 2 set pieces of tier 4, then you can farm gear nearly as good as a protection paladin. It just requires, like, obviously, you know, more preparation when it comes to getting gear, and you can't farm as fast as a protection paladin. You can't do as big pulls, but you can actually achieve pretty good, you know, gold earned per hour by farming the old dungeons. Anyway guys, that's where I'm getting it in the video. Tell me what classes you've decided to make your alt in the comment section below, and tell me why. My name is MetaGoblin. Until my next video, ciao.